There are many positive things that have been said about DreamWorks' latest animated feature, The Wild Robot. But what stands out most to me is the comparison being drawn with Studio Ghibli films, particularly those created by Hayao Miyazaki. In recent years, viewers have praised DreamWorks for their stylistic choices in films like The Bad Guys and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, but to go as far as comparing the film to the works of Miyazaki is particularly fascinating, since his filmography significantly differs from DreamWorks films and Western animation as a whole. So to draw this kind of parallel is to highlight a potentially radical shift in the world of Western animation, which makes The Wild Robot worth exploring. The movie also clearly gestures towards environmental issues, so it would be interesting to see how far it goes in doing that, and whether it relates at all to Miyazaki films in that area. The comparisons find their roots in comments made by the filmmaker himself, Chris Sanders, who is known for directing Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon, and who stated that Miyazaki's films have significantly influenced his approach to making The Wild Robot. When I read the book for the first time, I was struck by how deep the emotional wavelengths were, and I became concerned that if the look of the film wasn't sophisticated enough, people would see it as too young because of the predominance of animals in the forest setting. We've always talked about Hayao Miyazaki's forests, which are beautiful, sophisticated, immersive, and have depth. We wanted the same feeling for our film. As we see here, those influences seem to be primarily aesthetic in nature. Miyazaki's works can be first and foremost found in the style that marked The Wild Robot. It makes sense considering DreamWorks' recent efforts to innovate within their 3D animation by incorporating 2D aesthetics, though they're not the first to take credit for it, since this stylistic blend has gained mainstream attention with Sony Pictures Animation's Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse in 2018. In the case of The Wild Robot, though, the shift in style affects one aspect in particular, which links it to Miyazaki's films, and that is the landscape. As we've seen in the interview, Sanders highlights their approach to painting sophisticated images of the forests. This emphasis on the meticulous representation of nature is at the heart of Miyazaki's works, and it is refreshing to see that passion towards nature replicated in a Western major studio. This emphasis on nature by Miyazaki goes beyond the aesthetics and has an ideological dimension to it. It's a stylistic choice that mirrors Miyazaki's tendency to center environmental messages in his movies. In this book titled Animated Landscapes, History, Form, and Function, Melanie Chen dedicates a chapter to environmentalism and the animated landscape in two of the most notable Miyazaki works, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind and Princess Mononoke. She explains how the visual emphasis on depicting nature is strongly connected to the film's environmental philosophy. Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind and Princess Mononoke attempt to enlarge our perspective of environmental issues on an emotional level through representing the beauty and majesty of the landscape and by illuminating the interconnection between the human and non-human realm. This theme also happens to be at the heart of The Wild Robot, despite it operating as a fable that doesn't focus on any human characters. Animal characters, as well as the robot, can still be reflective of humanity and its relation to nature in these times of environmental crisis. All of that makes it intriguing to see whether the film draws inspiration from Miyazaki films on more than a visual level, but also a thematic one, intentionally or not. I have to emphasize this last point specifically because when it comes to intentions, there isn't much to find in the words of Chris Sanders when it comes to the Miyazaki influence in relation to environmentalism, or any other theme for that matter. In fact, it is hard to find insight into the themes of the movie in general. Most interviews are focused on the aesthetic and technical aspects of the film. It's even funny because when I finally found this one question that directly targeted the movie's message on technology, Sanders somehow managed to make it about the process of animation as well. When he was asked about what he hoped viewers would take away from the film, he said, "In a film that is arguably, possibly, about a robot that is run by AI, the reason this film is resonating with people is largely because it's a handmade film. This film is more handmade than any CG film that has come along in decades. Every surface, including the surfaces of the characters, is hand-painted." Don't get me wrong, the parallel he draws here is very interesting, but I still wish to see a more solid exploration of the movie's themes. The most Sanders seems to give is this emphasis on the idea of kindness being a survival skill. and I think this doesn't really give justice to a film that feels a little more complex than that. So death of the author it is. By that I mean it's also death of the other author, Peter Brown, who wrote the book from which the film was adapted, and who did not focus on the environmental dimension of the book as much as the adaptation did. In the end, The Wild Robot is a work of collaboration anyway, and its ideological intent can't be found in the words of individual creators. So we're going to look into the film itself instead to understand this ecological aspect of it. In addition to the depiction of natural landscapes, one major element in common between The Wild Robot and Miyazaki films is technology, especially as it relates to nature. Films like Princess Mononoke and Nausicaa explore the complex relationship between technology and nature, presenting a nuanced view that avoids simplistic dichotomies. They depict the tension between technological progress and environmental preservation, while also acknowledging the potential benefits and drawbacks of both. This is a point that Melanie Chan emphasizes in her paper. These films do not simply call for an outright rejection of science, technology, and industrialization. They do not uncritically idealize or offer sentimental representations of the landscape. Instead, these films can be interpreted as an attempt to find ways of using technology wisely and establishing communal concern for environmental issues. The Wild Robot lives up to those works, not only because of its focus on the same content, but also because of its intricate exploration of it. Like Miyazaki's films, the nature versus technology conflict is explored in a more nuanced way, as it highlights the ways in which technology can both have a negative and positive impact on the environment. This nuance is present in the film on many levels. Symbolically, we see it in one of the very first encounters between the robot Roz and the gosling egg. We see that Roz's first inclination was to stop the egg from cracking and to try to fix it. This symbolizes our perception of technology as something that has to necessarily oppose or control nature. This is a vision that the movie tries to challenge throughout its runtime, as we see that by the end, Roz learns how to coexist and even nurture the very creature that she tried to first suppress. This transformation challenges our perceptions and suggests that technology can be harmoniously integrated into environmental conservation efforts. On a visual level, we see that kind of integration in Roz's physical transformation as she becomes increasingly covered with grass, moss, and other natural elements. The color palette shifts from her initial metallic tones to include more earthy greens and browns. The textures applied to her surface evolve from smooth and artificial to rough and organic. This gradual change in Roz's appearance serves as a metaphor for the potential harmony between nature and technology. Narratively, we see this kind of cooperation in the evolving relationship between Roz and the island's inhabitants. At first, she is seen by them as an intruder, but gradually she becomes an integral part of the ecosystem. She learns how to communicate with the animals, bridging the gap between artificial intelligence and natural instinct. She adapts her technological capabilities to assist and protect the island's wildlife, which shows once again that technology is something that we can use to enhance our connection to nature rather than replace it. All of that being said, the film still doesn't shy away from reminding us of technology's destructive capacity when we misuse it. The climactic scenes featuring giant robots burning down the forest serve as a metaphor for the environmental devastation that can be caused by unchecked technological advancement. This kind of juxtaposed exploration invites the viewers to consider that the core issue lies not in technology itself, but in how we use it. It might be going even further than that by suggesting that much of the problem is rooted in corporate greed rather than individual actions. The entire movie serves to show the potential benefits of artificial intelligence in protecting wildlife when Roz is left to coexist with nature on her own. But towards the end, we realize that she's part of a larger system that will prevent her from using her experience for those benefits. The final encounter with the representative of universal dynamics perfectly symbolizes the ways in which the exact same technological advancements and data collected can either be used for preservation or destruction and the generation of profit, depending on who is using it. The threat thus becomes not AI itself, but the corporations and the way they exploit it. Perhaps it is too subtle, but there is a Miyazaki-esque quality to this very approach, as his films are renowned for their political undertones and sharp critiques of systemic exploitation, especially when it comes to environmental destruction. These thematic and aesthetic elements shared by both Miyazaki's works and The Wild Robot align closely with an interest in immersion genre, which is solarpunk. This is a literary and artistic movement that envisions a sustainable future where humanity coexists harmoniously with nature, utilizing renewable energy and eco-friendly technologies. While solarpunk is mostly present in fiction and art, not yet in cinema, the emphasis of Studio Ghibli and Miyazaki's films in particular on environmentalism made them some of the closest examples of what solarpunk cinema might look like. Now, The Wild Robot obviously doesn't neatly fit into the solarpunk template, but the elements it shares with Miyazaki's films make it similarly adjacent to the genre. The first one being its focus on sustainability. The movie naturally touches upon this aspect by following this robot character who has to adapt to this forest environment far removed from her technological origins. Surviving in such a world would entail the necessity to rely on sustainable means. We see that very early on in the movie when Roz explains how she manages to survive in the forest by relying on her solar surfaces and batteries. She's a highly advanced robot that is implied to have been operating on non-renewable energy sources before, but it was only solar energy that helped her survive in the end. We can also see that in the shelter that she builds for herself and for the Gosling, where she uses eco-friendly materials found in her surroundings. This once again exemplifies the possibility of technology coexisting with nature, another core element of the genre. Solarpunk aesthetics are characterized by this fusion of advanced technology and natural elements. They often feature futuristic cityscapes where modern architecture seamlessly integrates with lush vegetation, like skyscrapers with vertical gardens and high-tech transportation systems that travel above the trees in forests. Now, of course, The Wild Robot is far from this vision, as it's not set in an urban environment in the first place, but it still lives up to the concept, at least, by drawing this image of technology harmoniously coexisting with nature. The movie can also be linked to the solarpunk genre due to one very important element, which is the emphasis on community building. It is this part that makes The Wild Robot stand out the most and shares strong similarities with Miyazaki films and Japanese animation in general. The reason being that Western animation usually leans onto focusing on individual power and exceptionalism, but in The Wild Robot we see a strong emphasis on the necessity to work together in the face of ecological challenges. This message is mostly evident in the sequence of the harsh winter, that itself seems like a representation of climate change, as it threatens the lives of the island's inhabitants. That crisis was only resolved through the 3 pillars of solarpunk addressed in this video, as the animals find shelter inside Roz's home, thus utilizing a natural and sustainable refuge. They're also only rescued thanks to a robot's help, demonstrating the need for harmony between nature and technology. Finally, even beyond their rescue, it was emphasized that the animals would not be able to survive if they do not collaborate with one another. It's interesting to present this in a setting where animals who otherwise would not tolerate one another have to do so, now that they're facing ecological disaster, forming by that what we can consider as a disaster community. This idea that exceptional environmental circumstances require an exceptional kind of cooperation reminded me of this line from a novel I was reading at the same time, Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, a grittier science fiction work with strong environmental messages, and that is also considered influential to solarpunk literature. It was live and let live. Neither humans nor animals were foolish enough to waste time attacking one another. This perfectly echoes the message delivered in The Wild Robot's climactic speech on the necessity of collaboration and solidarity between all species facing ecological disaster. The shift from individualistic narratives is best symbolized through the story told by Fink, who starts by focusing on one single protagonist in the beginning of the movie and changes in the end to focus on the entire community.
Once there was this island with a little gosling.
Right, Bill?
And he was all alone. Once there was an island with all sorts of animals.
One final way in which The Wild Robot can be adjacent to the solarpunk genre lies in the element of punk. The word suggests a rebellious spirit that challenges the status quo. That, as we have seen earlier, can be reflected in the film through criticisms of corporations and human authorities. It can also be found in one of the key lines in the film on the necessity to reprogram.
Sometimes, to survive, we must become more than we were programmed to be.
This can be read as an invitation to reconsider anything that we have learned about how to relate to nature or combat climate change. On an artistic level, it's nice to see the message reflected to some degree in the film itself, as it does live up to it through its innovative style and different storytelling approach. On an ideological level, it can be seen as a good invitation to change the discourse, which is maybe a step towards the right direction. Reality, however, remains far from this discourse. The environmental message at the heart of the film, and even the choice to adapt this book in particular, is likely informed by the studio's policies and initiatives regarding environmentalism. DreamWorks is part of the company NBC Universal, which puts an emphasis on sustainability, so the film fits perfectly within this context. Needless to say though, these initiatives do not go far beyond a change of discourse and a few insignificant actions. Insignificant because they most certainly do not make up for the company's naturally huge impact on the environment, as is generally the case with the entertainment industry. The actions taken by the company to supposedly make small changes have not proven to be significantly effective by quantifiable data. The changes made are mild enough not to disturb the profits generated by the company, so the programming has not really changed with them. We can say they didn't truly follow their own message. But in the end, this is a children's movie that is produced within a much wider system that would be difficult, if not impossible, to reprogram. In that case, maybe the incorporation of the message itself can be a good step forward. The similarities noted between the film and both Miyazaki's filmography and the solarpunk genre might signal a positive shift towards more innovative and responsible approaches to storytelling. Well, as positive as one can possibly go within the constraints of mainstream Western animation.